He sat his mother to his left and his girlfriend to his right. They were both proud of him because today was supposed to be a special day for him. Jacob was overjoyed, but when his name was called, the principal came to a halt. He looked at Jacob for a moment before continuing with the list. People had a lot to say once they found out why Jacob was singled out at his graduation. Crown Point High School in Crown Point, Indiana had a student. His name was Jacob Dalton Stanley, and he had aspired to serve his country since he was able to walk. He aspired to the rank of sergeant. He was 10 years old and certain that this was the case. Jacob was careful not to mess things up, so he studied hard and completed high school before embarking on his big dreams. He finished his studies and applied to be a Marine immediately after graduating. He completed the required boot camp and returned to Indiana in time to celebrate his graduation. But he had no idea what would happen. When Jacob's girlfriend Shannon and his mother, Kathy, saw him walk up the steps to the house again, they were both filled with pride. His mother nearly burst into tears when she saw him in his Marine Corps uniform. She had a feeling her son had it in him. He was also about to complete his studies and she couldn't have been happier. The three made their way to the high school celebration. They were overjoyed with Jacob's accomplishment. All of his efforts were bearing fruit. Jacob was as overjoyed as his mother and girlfriend. When he received his diploma in front of his friends and family, he was going to beam with pride. He felt he'd earned it because he'd worked so hard in school for so long. Jacob's friends and teachers all smiled at him, happy to see him again, and some of them even saluted him. All of the students' excitement was palpable in the air. What Jacob had planned was to turn the excitement into surprise. Crown Point High School was led by Principal Chip Pettit. He entered the stage and took up the microphone. He scribbled down his notes and began the first lines of his speech. Following a brief speech, he began calling out the names of the graduates in alphabetical order. And even though soon everyone would hear it and be astonished. The principal had finally gotten to the S's. Jacob couldn't wait because the anticipation was killing him. Kathy smiled as she looked over at Jacob. He'd even prepared an acceptance speech, which he'd practiced until the words were well almost remembered. He jumped up, barely waiting for his name to be called. But there was a brief pause. The principal's gaze locked on Jacob's. He smirked, and then returned his gaze to his list. He then read the name that came after Jacob's. This was a travesty. He had purposefully omitted his name. Jacob couldn't believe his eyes. Why would he do such a thing? Perhaps his name wasn't on the list. Is it some kind of mix-up? He didn't get it. Jacob bowed his head. He remembered how he had defied the principal the day before. But he thought he'd be professional about it and not try to humiliate him as a form of retaliation. He considered himself to be perfectly reasonable. He had stood up for what he believed to be right. It was just that the principal didn't see it the same way he did. Why was his clothing such an issue, though? This is how he was treated after putting his life on the line to serve his country. What enraged Kathy the most was that she looked around and saw that other students were also breaking the graduation dress code. Despite this, their names were still called. Mr. Pettit, did you have a problem with her son? Kathy later stated in an interview that it was a disgrace. One student wore shorts and gym shoes and another wore a red turban to symbolize his religious beliefs. Jacob had arrived at the ceremony dressed in his full-dress blue Marine Corps uniform. To be fair, nothing in the Crown Point Community School Corp. bylaws addressed whether or not U.S. military uniforms could be worn at graduation. Everyone was outraged, but nobody expected Jacob's story to reach such high places. Jacob's peer, Leon Tustison, described the situation as absolutely ridiculous, due to the fact that he's in the military, risking his life for them, so it's unconscionable that he wasn't allowed to cross the stage. The students were outraged, and there were some students who planned to walk in support of Jake. However, the backlash didn't end there. Crystal Hernandez wrote on Facebook that it amazed her that people tell you to be proud that you're different, celebrate your uniqueness, yet at one of the most memorable events in your life, an administrator makes the decision to completely destroy your accomplishments. One enraged Facebook user wrote that he even wrote a letter to Mr. Pettit. He was aware that people who are withdrawing all financial support for SAFs and their programs as a result of this. He would have escorted his son across the stage if he had been his son. What, however, did Mr. Pettit have to say? Jacob, according to him, had been alerted. Mr. Pettit had informed Jacob earlier that day, during his Crown Point High School senior class graduation rehearsal, that he would not be allowed to wear his uniform to the ceremony. And much to Jacob's surprise, The principal kept his word. As a result, when he arrived at his graduation ceremony in uniform, his name was crossed out of the program. However, in the aftermath of an unbelievable amount of backlash, does Mr. Pettit regret it? Mr. Pettit has got a huge amount of backlash online, but he insists that he was only following school policy and stands by what he did. He contended that Jacob could have worn a military stole or cord over his gown instead and been recognized during the graduation ceremony. This tradition is not intended to be disrespectful to students, parents, or our community, Mr. Pettit told NBC Chicago, although no quantity of defense would make him less of a hypocrite in the eyes of the public. To add insult to injury, another school in the Crown Point area, Hobart High School, was involved in a similar situation that was covered by the media, but for a very different purpose. Anna Kritikos, a graduate, had also enlisted in the Marine Corps and, like Jacob, had graduated early in order to enlist. She was also allowed to wear her military uniform during the graduation ceremonies. When Anna returned for her graduation ceremony, she expressed to the high school administrators her desire to wear her military uniform. In contrast to Jacob's story, she stated that she had their full support. They have been absolutely incredible. The Marines don't mind if they wear the uniforms to high school graduation, according to Anna. Unlike Crown Point and their now unpopular principal, Peggy Buffington, superintendent of Hobart High School, stated that her school goes out of its way to recognize military graduates. By having the graduates stand, they were able to recognize audience members and future military personnel. It's always a very special and patriotic moment when the audience roars with applause, as Peggy explained. This year was particularly special because Anna Kritikos graduated midterm and arrived just in time for the graduation ceremony. They have already recognized her and the accomplishments she has made in the Marines. She is a military occupations specialist, private first class, and currently serving in Virginia in their intelligence specialist class, and began her training in January. Very proud of her achievements. Nevertheless, as per a spokesman for the United States Marine Corps, the military does not get involved with graduation dress codes. The Marine Corps does not dictate what specific high school students can or cannot graduate in, as stated Marine Corps Major Clark Carpenter. It was up to the school administration to make that decision. However, the school leaders may not be able to do so for long. When State Rep. Mike Aylesworth learned that Jacob had not allowed to attend his own graduation, he was outraged, and he agreed with all of the criticism directed at the school. He even contributed some of his own. He found what happened to be inappropriate, and he just think that people who are willing to put themselves in danger should be able to wear a uniform at graduation. And his remark drew more than just approval. State Rep. Mike Aylesworth received committee approval for a bill requiring school districts to allow students who are already serving in the military to wear their dress uniform instead of traditional graduation attire. Mike said that it's a jumble of local school board regulations from all over the state, and he just wanted it to be consistent across the state. Most school corporations in the state do the right thing and don't need a law for guidance, Mike said, clearly referring to Mr. Pettit and Crown Point High School. He thought that they should encourage young people who want to put their lives on the line for our country to graduate and walk across the stage. Jacob Stanley's father, Wheeler Stanley, declined to comment on the incident at the school, but he did say he would support legislation to enforce a uniform standard across the state. He would wholeheartedly support it, as he said. But what does Jacob have to say about it? He did not want the social media controversy to distract from the class of 2017, he said in an interview. He also did not want to make any further statements, and would like to put this all behind me so that he could begin my career in the Marine Corps.